So tonight I'm going to talk to you about my ideas about the alien agenda on planet Earth and in our society. And I know that some of you probably went to see Erich von Däniken recently, did you?
Yep.
And I didn't. But so those, when Erich von Däniken wrote his books many years ago, they sort of sparked in people's minds the idea of life on other planets being here, way back in our ancient history. And he quoted, as you know, he quoted a lot of evidence for that in our indigenous cultural myths, legends, writings, art, etc. And some of those date back, like this one here, I think this one dates back to about 55,000 BC. But modern researchers, they tend to have had another look at that, or I should say modern history of UFO researchers have looked back in history and they've thought that the idea that extraterrestrials or ancient aliens were visiting planet Earth, they came here, they taught indigenous peoples various things, language, agriculture, art, those sorts of things, and then they left. But modern researchers proposed that they actually never left, or some of them never left. They stayed here and they've continued to weave their way through our social, cultural development. And they've gone further to say that not only did they not leave, but they actually interact with human beings. And those interactions have had I believe, have had a more far-reaching consequence and effect on the inhabitants of Earth than what many of us really realise. And some of those contacts have said, some of those extraterrestrial contacts have said to their human contacts that they were concerned about what was going on planet Earth, concerned about the environment, concerned about our social and spiritual evolution not keeping pace with our technological evolution. And if we ever expected to get out there, we had to develop ourselves to a certain minimal benchmark so we could go out there and be part of the greater galactic neighbourhood. And some of those early contactees, generally their messages were about peace and respect for all life. This guy here, Truman Bethram, Daniel Fry, Elizabeth Clara, Orfeo Angelucci, George Adamski, they all were working towards the greater good of our society. And Daniel Fry, for example, he was very concerned about peace. After his contact experiences, he organised a group called Understanding. And if you read through some of those newsletters, which aren't available now, but we happen to have some in my home, in our records, which go back many years, if you read all of that, it's all about peace. So it's very much coming from a peace advocate position. George Adam, what about Elizabeth Clara? She actually worked in World War II in helping to decipher some of the German messages that were coming through. So she was, in her own way, being part of, I guess you could say, she was socially concerned about what was going on at the time and she wanted to partake in that. George Adamski too, he actually ignited people's minds. As you know, he had close encounter experiences of his own with this gentleman here, referred to as Orphon, and George Adamski would promote his extraterrestrial contacts as the Space Brothers. And those Space Brothers were concerned about what was going on the planet immensely. And they came here and gave messages to put down our weapons, basically, stop exploding atomic bombs, you don't know what you're doing when you split the atom. And by the way, when you explode bombs on planet Earth, the volcanoes on Mars erupt. So basically we have no clue what's really going on out there when we do something here, because we don't really understand the interactions and the vast connections of all the planets in our solar system. So he was going around the planet to various countries, igniting the minds of people about these sorts of issues. And that was all during the 50s and 60s. And those people were definitely changed by their experiences. And some of those people who aren't listed here went on and established spiritual organisations too. And that often still happens today with modern close encounters too. People become spiritually engaged after their experiences, whether they actually set up an organisation or they just become, that happens to them at a personal level, either way. But that was during the 50s and 60s. Then in the 70s we had the alien abduction experiences appear. And in the 80s, and really in a big way in the 90s. Everything happened in the 1990s. But before the 70s there were a couple of well-known cases. The Antonio Villas-Boas case in 1957 and the Betty and Barney Hill case in 1961. And the Villas-Boas case was actually sort of kept under wraps for a few years because there were some disturbing elements of that case that the researchers didn't really want to pass on to the public. And that was because Villas-Boas was basically dragged off by a couple of extraterrestrials into a spaceship and made to have sex with a female, who then indicated by sign language that she was going to actually take their progeny up into the sky, out there into space. So at that time, 1957, we didn't want that. People didn't want that out there. They wanted the Space Brothers, and they were the benefactors of human society. And then we had the Betty and Barney Hill case. You all know that one. But that was a well-documented abduction experience. But these were sort of, there were only a few of those in the 1970s that people actually knew about. But by 1990, we were hearing more and more of these experiences, of the abduction experiences. By the 90s, people wanted to know more about how prevalent these alien interactions were, in particular alien abduction experiences. So a group of people, Dr. John Mack, Bud Hopkins, Dr. David Jacobs, John Carpenter, and Dr. Ron Westrom all got together with the help of the Bigelow Foundation, who funded the study, and did survey of 6,000 American people, and to try and understand about what was going on with these close encounters. And they had 5 main indicated questions, and what they would do was done by the Roper organisation. They'd have every month they'd do a survey, and they could, if someone wanted to use their services, they'd tack on or intertwine some of these questions that people are looking for. And they had these indicated questions: waking up paralysed with a sense of strange person nearby, experiencing a period of missing time of 1 hour or more, feeling that you're flying through the air, seeing unusual balls of light in a room, and discovering puzzling scars on your body. Now, they believe that those 5 main questions were the ones that would point to people having close encounters. But there were others: seeing a ghost, feeling as if you've left your body, seeing a UFO, having seen a terrifying figure as a child or adult, having vivid dreams about UFOs, and hearing or seeing the word Trondon. And that last question was just a bit of a furphy, just to make sure that people weren't going tick, 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 tick for yes, 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 okay? So they inserted that, but only, I think 1% of people actually came up with that. So they worked out after that survey, that huge survey, that 2% of the population were actually experiencing close encounters. Now in Brisbane, that's 40,000 people. And I can tell you, I've spoken to over 3,000 people now in 27 years, and only about somewhere between 500 and 800 maybe now, people have actually come forward with close encounters. So with the possibility of 40,000 people having had close encounters, it makes you wonder, you know, who else out there that we're rubbing shoulders with every day who might be having these experiences, who we're sitting next to on the bus, who we're sitting next to anywhere really. So after that they found, and this is where it gets really interesting for me, it starts to feed into our topic, they found that there are a group of people who are more likely to report close encounters, and they're the influentials. And the influential people are political social actives, and they're more likely to report these experiences. So let's just start thinking about that. Why would influential people be more likely to report close encounter experiences? Well, let's look at who the influentials are to start. They play an especially active role in their communities and their nation. They're community leaders, committee members, workers in all kinds of local organisations, letter writers, good government advocates, political party workers, perhaps. But those people who are playing roles in our society are more likely to have close encounters. Just let that sink in for a bit. Predominantly they're in their 30s and 40s, married with children, wealthier than most Americans, better educated, 43% of university graduates compared to 20% of the total population in 1991. Okay? And then the trend setters rather than the trend followers. Again, these are the people who are more likely to report close encounters. Why? Let's go back to the contactees. Well, guess what? They played those roles in their time. They were people who got involved in social concerns and activities. They wanted to change the planet. For example, society should say, I've included Betty and Barney Hill here. Now, I don't know if you know it, but Betty Hill was an activist her whole life. She was involved in the civil rights movement. She was involved in, I had a list of them, but and her personal wealth was funneled into organisations like UNICEF and other groups like that. And there's a list of them I've got. But so she was very involved in changing her society, how people think, what they behave, how they behave. So in the 50s and 60s, we had all this revolution going on. But in the background of that, we had these huge amounts of UFO sightings and close encounter reports. UFO sightings and close encounter reports, social revolution. Just say that again. UFO sightings and close encounter reports, social revolution. Our society is changing in the foreground, but in the background, against a canvas of all of these extraterrestrial experiences. George Adamski himself went around the planet, he ignited the public mind. He was a lot of people call him a crackpot, a charlatan, hardcore UFO researchers would say, and you just don't bother listening to him, he just was a liar. I don't think he was. He might have become a bit unbalanced towards the end of his UFO standing, I guess, because he didn't sort of come into all this until he was a bit older. I think he was in his 60s, 50s, late 50s, 60s, I think, when he actually started to write his books. And those books were so popular, they were always selling off the shelf. But he was having audiences with the Pope, he was having audiences with Queen Juliana of the Netherlands. He was being observed by the CIA and the FBI. He was, after he'd have an experience, he would be debriefed and taken off to one of the Air Force bases, I can't remember the name of it, and then returned, and people witnessed that. And remember, this is in the days when people weren't hearing UFO presentations. We've done it a lot since then, but in those days, people were just flocking to those experiences. Now, I just wanted to run this by you to show you what actually was going on during that time with the establishment of various social movements in the foreground of this huge background of close encounters, UFO sightings, etc. And make no mistake, if extraterrestrials or beings, some of these spacecraft could actually be living beings, can disguise themselves, as we know at various times, you've got to wonder, why do they make themselves available to be seen by the population? And interestingly, when we went to the exhibition this week and we watched the sheepdog trials, the sheepdog was very clever, very intelligent animals, and all they had to do was just make eye contact with the sheep to make the sheep respond. They didn't have to do anything. So just remember that. So we had the peace movement in the 50s and 60s, the student protest movement in the 60s, remember that? Nuclear disarmament in the 60s, environmental movement in the 60s, the Green Revolution in the 60s, the hippie movement in the 60s and 70s, civil rights movement 60s to 80s, gay rights started in 67 to 69, feminist movement 1970s, the first Earth Day in 1970, and 72 Australia formed the first Green Party in the world in Hobart. So during that time there was a huge change of people's perception and reassessment, reevaluation of what was important, where they wanted society to go. And they could see, well, they didn't like it was going that way, they wanted to head this way. And you know what? Not much has changed. We'll get onto that in a minute. But let's just talk about the mechanics of change for a minute. Let's just say there are extraterrestrials who are trying to guide us in our social evolution. Would you come in and sort of just boom like this with trying to get people to change? Well, I'd say no, because if you're trying to do that, if there was any change, it would be very short term. It'd be like Band-Aid change, really. So what I would do if I was an extraterrestrial and I wanted to have an effect on a society to go in particular directions, I would already be assessing where in society that change, no matter how small, is taking place. And then I would prompt and move and direct those parts in a positive way, so that without the people knowing at the time that social change was being done from an external source, that it would be happening nonetheless. Okay, so if you wanted to hide what you were doing, you would follow the path, no matter how small, that's already going that way. And you would move, like the sheep with the dogs, herd them gently in that direction. That's how I see it anyway. And that would make more sense, it's a smarter way to do it. Now, people who have experiences, close encounter experiences, undergo huge transformations. The contactees did, and so do people today. And those transformations are quite complex, but interestingly they all go in a particular direction. They don't go like this. Everyone goes in their own direction and they evolve individually, in their own case, on their own path, out in like a starburst. They don't. They all start to come together and evolve in one direction, which I find very interesting. So they develop a greater appreciation for all life. Some people actually become vegetarians. In fact, there's a tendency for people who have close encounters to be vegetarians. They're more self-accepting. They have a greater concern for others. They have less need to impress others, less materialistic. Strongly increased concern for planetary and social issues. Quest for meaning. They go on their own quest for meaning. More spiritual, less religious. And they have a heightened sensitivity to ecological matters. And I find that last one quite often comes up. I've had people sitting at my dining table who are crying because seal pups are being banged on the head, or the dolphins are beaching on the on the sand and all those sorts of things. Completely upset about that. So enter the Omega Project. And this is a book by Dr. Kenneth Ring. It's about near-death experiences, UFO encounters, and mind at large, which changed my understanding of the UFO phenomenon when it came out. Now, the background to this is Ken Ring, Dr. Ken Ring, was one of the early pioneers of, he helped to establish the International Association of Near-Death Studies. But sometime in the 80s, he was approached by someone who said to him, Bud Hopkins, I think, no, not Bud Hopkins, someone, he said, you really need to read Whitley Strieber's book, Communion. So he did. And he found there were a lot of similarities between people who report close encounters and people who report near-death experiences, in that they have the experience and then they undergo this transformation, and the transformation is very specific, very much like what I just pointed out to you before. And he believed that NDEs might be a catalytic event in human evolution, serving to jumpstart the human race to a higher level of spiritual awareness and psycho-spiritual functioning. Now what he did was he surveyed 6,000 people as well who'd had near-death experiences. And he also surveyed people who'd had close encounters. Don't ask me, maybe it was a combination of two, sorry. The 6,000 in total was near-death experiences and close encounter experiences. And he found they were very, very similar, except for the initial experience. Okay. In World War II, or after World War II, UFO reports increased, and they increased immensely. And the official Air Force figures per year, you can see 1940 to 46, very low amount. But after the war, they averaged 550 reports a year, peaking in 1952 at 1,501 reports. 1966 recorded 1,060 reports. In 1967, John Keel reported that during that period, the North American Newspaper Alliance reported 10,000 published reports. Because what I showed you before is what the military numbers, what the Air Force numbers were. But this is what was actually going on, right? They reported in the United States, out of which the Air Force listed a meager 1,060. Sorry, I might have had that wrong. It might just be America. Yeah. And 1967, the most frequent UFO sightings were over US atomic energy installations, US Air Force bases, naval and marine bases worldwide, White Sands Missile Range, in New Mexico, aircraft plants, and America's major cities. So at the time, in 1967, UFOs were definitely interested in what we were doing that could kill people, cause harm to planet Earth, to our environment as well. Mark Satin, he was an anti-draft advocate, and I like this quote from him. He said, "Change comes from the fringes of society where the real beginnings and the real discoveries often take place." And I believe that's true, because on the fringe of our society are people who have close encounters often, right? And I know that because some people, or many people I've spoken to over the years, who've had close encounters don't exactly fully reintegrate into our society, because one, they've got a story to tell that is not well received often or believed, and two, because they feel so different because of their experiences. So they don't really quite know where to fit in exactly, okay? And as you can imagine, having close encounters, that just upsets your whole world. It makes you reassess everything. Everything from relationships, to work, to your personal identity, everything. So, people are having close encounters. We've got the contactees, right? We've got the people from the abductees, and they're all having they're having extraterrestrial contact. Some of it positive, some of it not so positive, but they're all changing in similar ways. And I find that interesting too. In fact, people that during the 90s that I've spoken to who had close encounters, they changed in a positive direction eventually, despite their experiences being very troubling and traumatic. And I find that interesting too. So, here's another piece of the puzzle. Enter the cultural creatives. Now, I don't know, have anyone heard of the cultural creatives? No? Okay. All right, well, this was a book that came out a few years ago now about how 50 million people are changing the world. And it was by Paul Ray and Sherry Anderson. And they studied what they believed was this new movement, this grassroots movement of people who were changing our society. And they said cultural creatives were a quarter of the population. They care deeply about ecology and saving the planet. They care deeply about relationships, peace, social justice, authenticity, self-actualization, spirituality and self-expression. They're inner-directed and socially concerned. They're activists, volunteers and contributors to good causes. Something to sound a bit familiar? 60% of them are women, and at the core of the group it's a ratio of 2 women to 1 man. Their greatest concern is the environment. And I read this and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. This is starting to sound very similar to what I was just telling you before, about the types of people who are the influentials, who the Roper report discovered were more likely to report close encounter experiences. Cultural creatives see ordinary people as mystics, believe in voluntary simplicity, have green and green values, they're unjobbing so they can live a more authentic life, making a living while making a difference, returning to the spiritual values of our ancestors and perceive Earth as a global village. And I can tell you, those are values that people who report close encounters that I have spoken to over the years, they share those. So, the cultural creators in the 60s represented less than 5% of the population. In the 1990s, they represent 26%. In 2010, they represent 33% of the population. And it's in this group of movers and shakers where you'll find the majority of people who report ET contact. Starting to come together a little bit more, right? So I'm proposing that there are people in our society who have close encounter experiences. They tend to be these influential people who are the good government advocates, the committee members, the letter writers. They are the change artists, and those change artists are the cultural creators, and they're forming a new paradigm. And I believe that that comes from these people who report close encounters, and they're being changed, and because of that our society is being changed. So I think there's a quiet revolution afoot. I think that, I don't know why, I'm not sure, but I think it probably goes back to the beginning where people, extraterrestrials or whoever they are, beings, have told human beings that we need to lift our game to be able to go out there and become part of the galactic neighbourhood, really. Is it a cosmic nudge? Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. I think it is. And I think it's been going on for a very long time. And if any of you have been watching the Ancient Alien series on TV, have any of you watched that yet? Or DVDs, whatever? If you should buy it, it's fantastic. You get it from JD Hi-Fi. And those researchers go into great detail to lay before the viewer piles and piles of evidence that extraterrestrials have had involvement in our ancient history, but also our modern history, in World War II, in various revolutions, all those sorts of things, that they have played a part in that for a specific agenda to help humanity perhaps, get past the dangerous point of our own evolution where we failed to understand that we should really live well enough alone in some things. 2, that our technology, we're just focusing on our technology and leaving the social and the spiritual sciences behind. And what happens when you do that, you know, and you topple over, and society really it's a problem. It's a real problem, because if we don't develop the wisdom to use that technology, we will blow ourselves up, we will wipe out the planet. And I know I'm talking to the converted, but you know, that's what's going to happen. So it's really important for people to raise these social concerns when they can. And I know that my experiences is, if you want to hear someone talk about environmental concerns, just hang out at a UFO meeting, because it's going to come up. You know, it's part of our makeup because of who we are and our interests. But I don't think it's just that. I think that humanity, at least in Western civilization, I cannot speak for the East or, you know, other cultures, but in the Western civilization, maybe we're the ones who need the biggest cosmic nudge. That I think that's what's really going on. If we want to be part of that galactic village, I think that there are probably some things in place that we have to step up to. I can't see that that you know, imagine if it was us out there and there was this you know, devastation on planet Earth that a lot of humanity has been you know, party to. We wouldn't want that to come out into our neighbourhood. So, I mean, we just turn our nose up at people who got crap out in the middle of, on the front yard. You know, don't want that out in our street to be nice. Thank you very much. So if we want to be, you know, if we want to get out there in the galactic neighbourhood, then maybe we need to step up our game as well. So that was it. Thank you very much. I wanted to lay that out in front of you.